Have you ever wondered how to add shirring to your sewing project? In this video, you're going to learn how. So in case you aren't familiar with shirring, it's rows of stitching that cinch your fabric to add shaping to a pattern, and you can add this detail without fiddling with any pattern alterations. With just a few rows of shirring stitches, a loose-fitting garment transforms into a shapely little number. Here's what you'll learn in this video. What is shirring? Is it the same as smocking? What patterns in fabric work for shirring? And how do you shear? Watch until the end of the video to get tips for troubleshooting if you run into any problems. All right, hey Lisa, tell us, what is shirring?
So shirring is a method that uses rows of elasticized stitching to create shaping. So when you're machine shearing something, you'll have all-purpose thread in your needle, and then you'll have elastic thread in your bobbin, and it'll create stitches that are nice and stretchy and add a little bit of shaping. You can actually see a great example of elastic shearing on the Carter dress, which is right behind me. There are several rows of elastic stitching at that waistline to give it a cinched, more hourglass silhouette.
So is shirring the same thing as smocking?
That is a great question, and they are not the same, and I think that this is a really common mix-up. So smocking utilizes embroidery stitches to create these really intricate kind of pleating type patterns. So it's achieving something similar in that it's creating shaping. It's taking a wider width of fabric and it's smushing it into a narrower width, but the effect is very different. Smocking is much more decorative, it's more time consuming, very lovely. And the shirring is a lot faster, it's snappier to put in, and although it does add some texture, it's not adding, the decorative stitching that smocking adds.
All right, so what kinds of patterns in fabric work best for shirring?
So you're gonna wanna look for something that has at least 10 inches or more of ease, I would say. But you don't want to go with too much because there's only so much work that elastic can do to kind of gather everything down. Lighter weight woven fabrics are going to work best. I think something like a double gauze is really lovely. The Carter that's behind me is in a tencel, which has a lot of drape and is also lightweight. Rayons, shirtings, things like that are going to be perfect.
All right, tell us what tools and notions you need to do shirring.
So to do shirring, you're going to need just a few different notions and tools. Most importantly, you're going to need elastic thread. You'll also need an all-purpose sewing thread, a marking tool, and a ruler so you can make all those straight lines. And then optionally, you could also use a walking foot. This can be really helpful just to make sure that you're getting really even, nice stitches.
All right, great. Well, let's see how it works.
Absolutely. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to wind our bobbin with our elastic thread. So this step we actually have to do by hand, because if we were to wind it by machine, then the machine bobbin winding mechanism would pull the elastic thread really tight, and that would not allow the elastic to do its job. So I'm just going to pull a little thread through one of the holes in the bobbin, and I'm going to loosely wind the elastic thread onto my bobbin. And if you're doing a lot of shirring, you might want to do this with multiple bobbins at the same time. Runaway thread. All right. Let's take this over to our machine and set things up for shirring. Next, thread the top of your machine as usual, and then we're going to put our bobbin with elastic thread into our machine. So just prepare your bobbin as usual and give yourself an extra long tail for your machine to grab onto. Then bring that elastic thread to the top. It's really key that you're always leaving yourself a really long tail so it doesn't snap down underneath your sewing machine. And then if you have a walking foot, you can go ahead and install it onto your machine at this time. Then go ahead and raise your stitch length to anywhere between 3 and 4, and we can adjust this once we test everything. I'm going to start at 3.5. Let's go ahead and test our setup as it is. So I'm going to start with a couple of stitches and a very generous back stitch. Then sew across my fabric. and end with, again, a very generous back stitch. When you are done, make sure you are leaving a nice long tail. And here is what my first pass looks like. It's kind of wonk, kind of sad, but there are a few things we can do to troubleshoot this. The first thing that we can do is we can go ahead and lengthen our stitch length. I'm going to go up to a 4. And you can also go to a zigzag stitch, but a very narrow zigzag stitch. So here I'm at about a 1 millimeter length or width, and then I'm going to go to a 4 length. I'm going to see if that combination will help me. On to testing round 2. Here is what my second batch of shearing looks like. It's better, but it's not quite there yet. So I have one more trick to show you if this is happening to you. We are going to adjust the tension on our bobbin. So on the case of your bobbin, everyone's going to look a little bit different, but on most bobbin cases, you'll see a small little screw. And I am going to use that screw. I'm going to tighten it about 1 rotation to adjust the tension of my bobbin thread. If you have a drop-in bobbin, you are going to have to check out your manual because those are all a little bit different. So I am just going to tighten this, then load it back in your machine and give it another test. Okay, and this is what my shearing looks like after that test. I'm looking for something that has a little bit of a gatheredness to it, but the really gathered look of shearing is going to come from multiple lines of this stitching and a little bit of magic that we will do over with our iron. So I'm really happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my actual sample. Now that we are done testing our stitching, we're going to prep our project for some shearing. And I'm going to use a water-soluble marking tool and a clear ruler to make some lines on my project. I'm using a rectangle of fabric for demonstration purposes, but you will likely be using an actual garment. So I am going to draw my first line across my fabric, and this line should be running perpendicular to your center front or your center back, or if you're doing it on a sleeve, perpendicular to the grain line. And then I'm going to draw a series of lines beneath that, and they're all going to be a 1/2 inch apart from each other. And you could certainly use your presser foot as a guide on this, but I find that when I am actually sewing the shearing, and the more lines you get in there, the more gathered it's going to look. It can be kind of hard to see what you're doing, and having these drawn lines is super helpful. Let's go ahead and sew this shearing. Just like in my test, I'm going to make sure that I'm really aggressively backstitching. Long tail, snip, and then repeat. And you'll find that after your first row, you're going to have to pull your fabric a little bit just to counteract the gathering that's already starting to happen from your first line of stitching. So I'm just pulling it very gently just to smooth out my fabric as I sew. And you might be wondering, Haley, what is the reason for all of this really deep back stitching? And that is because your elastic thread is going to have a tendency to want to snap back, and you don't want it to snap through your needle stitches and basically undo all of your work. So you just want to be really extra with the back stitching. This is what it's looking like after I've done 7 lines of shearing. You'll notice that it's not totally gathered up. It's just a little bit wavy looking. It's looking lightly gathered, and that is okay. We are going to go over to the ironing board and do a little magic trick, and then we'll get to see the final result. Now it's time for my favorite part of the whole shearing process, and that is steam magic. So what I'm going to do is I have my iron set to a really hot setting, as hot as your fabric will tolerate. And I have it set to steam, and I'm going to hover it about an inch above my shearing and give it a couple bursts of steam. You can already see it starting to shrink up. And I just do this for 20 seconds, and you can also flip it over to the other side and give it a few more shots. Look at that. So literal sewing magic. You can see that it didn't look very promising at first, but the steam really, it's the secret sauce. So if you are really struggling with your test swatch, go ahead and give it a little steam and just see what it does, because that might be the ingredient that it's missing. Now my fabric is about, I don't know, 60% of the width that it originally was, which really on a garment is going to provide quite a lot of shaping.
All right, let's recap how to shear. And if you need to reference this tutorial in the future, you can skip right to this chapter. What other specialty techniques do you want to see? Comment with your requests and we can make a video tutorial.